I was a junior sensor operator aboard the Keth-class destroyer Verith when I watched 4,000 ships die. This is not a figure of speech. I had a sensor board in front of me that reported fleet tonnage, hull signatures, and weapons yield, and I watched those numbers fall from 317 to 0 in a period of time that I will tell you precisely, because precision is the only respect I know how to pay to what I saw. 41 minutes and 17 seconds. The Galactic Consolidation's 7th Response Fleet, assembled from 11 member species over 3 decades, annihilated in 41 minutes by a single human warship. I was 19 years old. I should provide context, though context feels inadequate given what followed. The Keth Consolidation is not a small power. We field 140 destroyers, 40 heavy cruisers, and the 7th Response Fleet had been assembled as a combined species force to address a boundary dispute in the Cressian Corridor, the kind of operation where the fleet's presence is the argument, not its weapons. No one expected to fire a shot. The intelligence brief said the corridor's primary human vessel traffic consisted of civilian freight haulers and 1 registered military liaison craft, an Obsidian-class vessel logged as a protocol escort. Our fleet analysts had reviewed the registry. The word they used in the briefing was negligible. The Obsidian-class vessel was in the corridor when we arrived. I have been asked to describe it, and I find the difficulty is not that there are insufficient words, but that no combination of words carries the correct weight. It was large. This sounds inadequate until I tell you that our fleet's largest heavy cruiser, the flagship Ketharar, is 1.4 kilometers in length and is considered, among the 11 member species of the Consolidation, to be a formidable vessel. The Obsidian-class ship was longer than the Ketharar by a factor of perhaps 7. My sensor board gave me a length estimate of 9.2 kilometers, and my sensor board had never before given me an estimate I considered physically implausible, and for approximately 4 seconds, I entered the figures again, assuming an instrumentation error. There was no instrumentation error. It was dark. The hull was a near black alloy that seemed to absorb the ambient starlight rather than reflect it, with deep scorch marks and oxidized hull sections that spoke of previous engagements on a scale I could not immediately imagine. The only lights on its surface were the engine array at the stern, which glowed a deep amber orange across perhaps 40 exhaust ports, and a grid of pale sign windows running along the ship's upper spine that indicated, I was later told, a crew and operational sections. The ship was oriented side-on to our fleet's approach vector, which I initially understood as a defensive posture. I later came to understand it was the length showing angle. They wanted us to see how long it was. Fleet Admiral Torith transmitted a hail on standard consolidation frequency at maximum power. The Obsidian-class ship did not respond. Torith transmitted again, citing consolidation treaty protocol and requesting registry verification. He was thorough and formal. He gave 3 minutes for a response. After 3 minutes and no response, he ordered the fleet to advance to intermediate range and transmitted a third hail, this time stating that the human vessel's position in a claimed corridor constituted an act of non-compliance under the Cressian Boundary Agreement and requesting that it relocate or stand by for boarding inspection. The Obsidian-class ship did not respond. What it did instead was move. I want to be precise here because every time I tell this story, the tendency is to collapse the detail in favor of the summary, and the summary loses what actually happened. The ship did not turn. It did not rotate. It accelerated on its existing vector, perpendicular to our fleet's approach, for 11 seconds, building to a speed my sensor board registered as 0.7 of light, which was the highest speed value my sensor board was capable of displaying without switching to scientific notation. Then it was at our fleet's flank before any vessel in the 7th Response Fleet had completed a rotation. What happened next took 41 minutes and 17 seconds. I did not fire my station's weapons. I was a junior sensor operator. My role was to report readings to my superior, Lieutenant Commander Hiva, who was responsible for relaying fleet sensor data to the bridge. What I did was read my sensor board and report what I saw in the precise, flat voice of someone who has been trained to report data and is using that training to stay functional during something that would otherwise have been incomprehensible. The Obsidian-class ship used what our fleet's analysts later called, in the report I read 18 months after the engagement, a tiered engagement protocol. It did not open fire on the entire fleet simultaneously. It selected targets in a specific sequence, the fleet's long-range weapons platforms first, then the communications relays, then the heavy cruisers, then the destroyer squadrons in descending order by tonnage. The precision was the worst part. A catastrophic weapon strikes randomly. What I watched was not random. It was the methodical clearance of a battlefield by something that understood, exactly and completely, what our fleet was capable of, and had decided to remove each capability in the optimal order. At 15 minutes, 200 ships remained. At 28 minutes, 440 ships remained. At 37 minutes, the Ketharar was destroyed. I know this because my sensor board recorded the hull signature drop, and because Lieutenant Commander Hiva made a sound at his console that was not a military sound, and then he told me to continue reporting. At 41 minutes and 17 seconds, there were no Consolidation fleet signatures remaining on my sensor board except the Verith, which had survived because it had been positioned at the fleet's extreme rear, and because, I believe, though I cannot prove, the Obsidian-class ship had chosen not to pursue it. The sensor board showed the Obsidian-class vessel stationary at its final firing position, engines at low output, oriented side-on again, the length showing angle. No second transmission was sent, no demands were made. The human vessel had not, to the best of my knowledge and the Consolidation's intelligence review, sustained any damage. After 11 minutes of silence, I watched it accelerate out of the corridor on a heading consistent with human-controlled space, and disappear from my sensor board at a range my instrumentation could not follow. I am now 47 years old. I have served in the Keth Sensor Corps for 28 years since the Cressian Corridor engagement, and I have reviewed the Consolidation's intelligence files on human military capability many times in the course of that service. The files have been substantially revised since I was 19. The 7th Response Fleet's engagement is listed in those files under a category I will translate from the Keth as Scale Reference Event. It is used as a calibration data point, the known baseline against which any new information about human military capacity is measured. The Consolidation has not sent a fleet into the Cressian Corridor since. I was asked once, by a junior analyst reviewing the engagement records, what I thought had been the purpose of the human ship's action. I told her I believed the purpose had been exactly what it appeared to be, a demonstration, not a provocation, not a defense, a demonstration. This ship, this single ship, had been positioned in the corridor because someone, somewhere in human command, had decided that the Consolidation's 7th Response Fleet needed to understand something it had not previously understood. She asked what that was. I said the registry entry. She asked what I meant. I said, the intelligence brief said the Obsidian-class vessel was logged as a protocol escort. It was logged as a protocol escort. That was accurate. Among human military designations, a protocol escort is the ship class you send when you want the other party to receive a message without requiring them to actually read it. She thought about that for a moment. I told her, the word our analysts used was negligible. I have spent 28 years thinking about that word.